Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me is my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. You know what I like about my job?
What's that?
I like that I've been in the same technology for, well, let's say 8 years. And I still come away, like this week, I walked away going, how did I not know that?
Still learning stuff.
Still learning stuff. And sometimes it's legitimately like, wow, that is really cool. Like, how did I not know that? Kind of. So I had one of those weeks this week where I was just pouring through some of the spec docs and stuff like that. I'm like, I had no idea it could do this.
Well, I'm glad that was your experience, Steve, this week, because the news that is coming out of the open source world is one that everyone would do well to keep an open mind and be prepared to learn something that maybe you didn't know before. SUSE, SUSE Linux from SUSE.com, a key priority to continue to provide choice for customers. SUSE has announced today that they will build, support, and contribute a hard fork of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the code base to the community. This is what we excel at. And it will give long-term credibility and choice to customers. Equally, as an enterprise Linux user, you can switch SUSE while keeping your existing Linux. At SUSE, we are experts at providing enterprise value to users of open source software in a highly competitive way without compromising what is important to customers. So, before I go any further, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of things, Steve. Chief of which, what is their target audience for this letter to use phrasing like, you can switch to SUSE while keeping your existing Linux?
You know what? I have a lot of spicy thoughts about this, and maybe sometime when we're not being broadcast over the radio, a few of us can get together and chat about this. But I think it's an interesting play. Like, on the face of it, I read their, I guess you could say press release. I'm not exactly sure whether it was a blog or a press release or whatever. I read it several times because I thought, I got to be missing something here. Like, there's some subtext or something that I don't get because I'm not closely attuned with the SUSE folks. Ultimately, what it felt like is they are, so if you rewind the clock back to last year, if you remember, they released, do you remember what the project is called? So they had Liberty. They have SUSE Liberty, which is essentially a way to help you manage RHEL-based or CentOS or Alma or Rocky, those type of distributions. It's a way to help you manage those sorts of heterogeneous environments. And then they come out and they talk about how you can switch to SUSE while keeping your existing Linux. To me, if I think back to the Liberty announcement and then the subsequent rollout, of course, it was more than just an announcement. They rolled it out. What it seems to be is they're looking to be able to support enterprise customers across a variety of distributions instead of just like niching down in their own. Like Canonical and Red Hat and Oracle all specialize in their own software and the stuff that they ship with their distributions as best they can. And it seems like, now you tell me, but it seems like this is SUSE saying, hey, we'll support a broader audience than just SUSE Linux.
Yeah, I mean, there is a question of value add here, right? Is the value, and we're going to talk about the announcement from Oracle here in just a moment, but you'll notice a common thread here. Is the value proposition that you're bringing something to the party, and so you ultimately are trying to convince the target audience that you bring more to the party than the people that you're forking, or is the value there that you're a clone of the popular thing? I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure like I said, I have some rough analogies that were running through my mind, or when I was running through this, I was thinking, how would I've been a big fan of those YouTube series where it's like X if you were honest, like the government if it was honest, or company if it was honest. And so I tried to remake this blog post in the if you were honest kind of style, just out of because I was out to amuse myself. And at some point I'll share that with you and some of the close listeners in there on Mumble. Perhaps maybe that's the hook to get more people to join in on Mumble. But for the public eye, I'm not really sure what SUSE's game long term here is. If I was to try and be as analytical as I could, I would say it seems like SUSE isn't getting enough core business with SUSE Enterprise Linux in North America. I would stress that because I know that over in Europe, they're a lot more entrenched than they are here. And so, as all companies are, they're looking to open up markets. And it seems to me that they're saying, well, we weren't able to create a bulkhead for our product in North America. So maybe our footprint is, hey, you know what? We'll help you in this time of need. And again, putting my SUSE hat on, not necessarily this is what I think is happening, but I think this is what's going through some people's minds, is like, there's been a disturbance in the OpenShift force, as it were. And so SUSE is looking at this like, how do we become good guys, right? And SUSE has always been the scrappy kind of, underdog's not the right term, but like if you look at their music videos. What's that?
Maybe Red Hat.
I also wouldn't go that far either, right? Like they stand on their own. They do a lot of really good technical things, like the build service and so on. So I'm trying to be as generous as possible.
Sure.
But,
But it does seem like you have to decide, is it your product that is better or is it the duplicate that is better? Where is so that really comes down, come down to it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So they've made this hard fork. So they've kind of made their bed in the sand. They looked at the lay of the land. They believe that they're up to this challenge. And so they're going to do this. Now we've invited SUSE on the show. So we'll wait to see what they have to say. And I'll be interested to hear it directly from them. Also in top of the news this week, Oracle. Oracle came out with an announcement on their site, and I have to be honest with you. I am shocked that this left Oracle's press room. I really am. So just kind of stepping through this piece from Oracle. So they say Red Hat is owned by IBM. So they make this distinction between IBM and Red Hat. And what I think is interesting about that is, yes, it is true that Red Hat is owned by IBM. And so in theory, IBM could absolutely come in and tell Red Hat, you will do X, and Red Hat would have no choice but to do X. But the people that I've talked to at Red Hat tell me that isn't what happened. In fact, they emphatically deny that that's what happened and say that nobody from IBM was anywhere near the room. So I'd either like to hear where IBM had something to do with this, or I wish we would stop referring to IBM as Red Hat, even though we can all acknowledge what is blindingly obvious, which is that IBM owns Red Hat. And I mean, unless we're just going to start going, you don't know the answer to that, just Alphabet Corporation it. I'm sorry, what? You mean Google it? No. Alphabet Corporation, they own Google, so it's their search engine. So you Alphabet Corporation it. So from their article, from Oracle's article, why did IBM make this change? Well, if you read IBM's blog attempting to explain their rationale, it boils down to this. RedHat.com. At Red Hat, thousands of people spend their time writing code to enable new features, fixing bugs, integrating different packages, and then supporting the work for a long time. We have to pay people to do that work. So the emphasis there, what I take from that, from what Red Hat wrote, is that they are a conduit between the people that are willing to pay code and the people that are willing to write code that want a paycheck for it. That was from redhat.com, which is apparently IBM's blog. So the article from Oracle continues. Interestingly, IBM doesn't want to continue to publicly release RHEL source code because it has to pay its engineers. That seems odd, given that Red Hat is a successful independent open source company that chose to publicly release RHEL source and pay its engineers for many years before IBM acquired Red Hat in 2019 for $34 billion. And perhaps that's the real answer to the question as to why eliminate competitors. Fewer competitors means more revenue opportunities for IBM. And I think that's that line right there. The real answer to the question is eliminate competitors, and there's few competitors and more opportunity for IBM. I think that is the disconnect for me and for a lot of other people. So what I take away from all of this is Red Hat said, go find a problem and make it better. Go do something, essentially. Contribute something. So I'm looking to SUSE and to Oracle and Alma and Rocky and any other distribution that was previously a RHEL clone to find a problem and make it better. And then they concluded with this. And this is the line that made me just almost fell off my chair. As long as Oracle distributes Linux, Oracle will make the binaries and source code for that distribution publicly and freely available. So that is the easy part of the promise to keep, right? Anybody can publish their code to the internet. That part isn't hard. They continue. Oracle welcomes downstream distributions of every kind, community and commercial, and we're happy to work with these distributors to ease that process. Work together on the content of Oracle and ensure that Oracle software products are certified for your distribution. Okay, that's better because at least now we have the, and so here's what we're doing part of it, but it really only matters if people want to clone what you have in the first place. And then I misspoke. This is the part that I almost fell off my chair. Finally, to IBM, here's a big idea for you. You say you don't want to pay all those RHEL developers? Well, here's how you can save money. Just pull it from us. Become downstream distributor of Oracle Linux, and we'll happily take on that burden. Like I said, I'm utterly shocked that this left Oracle's press room. In part because it's Oracle, right? They are a legal entity with a bunch of tech stuff attached and hanging off to it. They're hardly considered like the pinnacle of a technology. The other part of it is people have not forgotten Oracle. People, I mean, do they think that we've forgotten how they treated Sun Microsystems? What happened with OpenZFS? What happened with MySQL? How about the lawsuit in federal court against Google for using a Java API for an open source language? So I'm not saying that Red Hat is perfect and beyond reproach here, but this feels to me a little bit like the pot calling the kettle black. And again, the most valuable contribution an established company can make to the open source world is to be a conduit from the people that are willing to pay for the code to the developers to write the code. The big difference between proprietary software companies and the ones that make open source software is simply that they make the code available. And Red Hat has consistently been a company that found people doing valuable work on projects and gave them a check to continue doing it. And RHEL mailed JT, Q5Sys in the chat room and on Twitter, they mailed him his copy of the source code that he was entitled to under the GPL. So Red Hat is keeping their end of the deal. And I get that it feels like it's your big brother who's always had your back on the street, and all of a sudden now he just left you out in the street while he went inside to the nice big house to play with his new friends. And if SUSE and Oracle have something of value to add to the mix, then I'm excited to watch them do that. Because I like the idea of competition. I do. The more people playing, the better we all are off. But nobody needs Red Hat's permission to succeed here. You don't even have to announce that you're doing it. You can just go do it. So support releases for 10 years at a time, for 8 releases since 2002, 9 versions before that, going back to 1994. Do that for 30 years, and I promise you, you'll have earned the same amount of trust that people had for Red Hat. But don't kid yourself. One, Red Hat absolutely has the right to do this. And it is also true, because 2 things can be true at one time, that Red Hat is absolutely painting a back on their target, or a target on their back. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's not uncouth, and doesn't mean that people don't see it that way. And so that target is, it spreads fear that leads to uncertainty and insecurity, and that creates this vacuum of opportunity for everybody else to show up and say, we'll save you from this, right? And so, to me, it comes down to, you use Red Hat the way they tell you to use it, which is stream, it tracks ahead, but realistically, there are not going to be any problems. Use Red Hat proper with a free developer account, or pay for a Red Hat subscription because it's only $179 a year. Or wait for Alma and Rocky and Oracle and SUSE and to figure it out, and they will. And if they don't, somebody else will. Valve seems to be doing just fine with Arch shipping it with KDE to people all over the place that bought their box. And if you're still worried about it, then I would suggest that you ask yourself this. When was the last time that you as a Linux nerd had to use one very specific distribution of Linux or the world was going to come to some catastrophic end? You can make it work in just about any distro. So there's legitimately there. In fact, I have trouble sometimes. I'll SSH into a machine and I'll forgot what the underlying OS is, thanks in large part to Ansible. Largely, sometimes that gets obfuscated. And with immutability and containers and all the rest of it, that's going to become even less relevant. Even more than it was 5 years ago. Steve, your thoughts on the Oracle thing?
Oh man, where do you start with something like this? So, first
Unbreakable
of all,
Linux, that's where.
Yeah.
With
right?
Java. Does it work? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. So Oracle becoming the upstream of RHEL is kind of an interesting thought. I don't have any inside knowledge into what Oracle does to build Unbreakable Linux. I feel like there might be harvesting of the source RPMs from the Red Hat sources, either CentOS or wherever they were getting it from. I feel like that was likely at least part of the strategy. And again, I don't have any knowledge to that. I'm sure there are engineers working away there. I wonder how much additional work it would be for them to take on the idea of, okay, we'll pull it from CentOS Stream. If they're not going to pull it from Stream, where are they going to get this from? Are they going to chart their own course, which is a possibility, right? Like before CentOS Stream, Red Hat charted their own course. So, I mean, that's completely possible. The question then becomes, as Red Hat, you're not going to do that because you are now putting your reputation on the line, like the hard-earned reputation. Let's roll back the clock 6 months before this decision was made. Yes, okay, we've got the CentOS Stream thing that happened 2 years ago, but notwithstanding that specific situation, Red Hat built a really good reputation for delivering solid enterprise software that was crusty. And crusty in the business world is good. But they didn't get there overnight. It took them decades to get to that point where they could be trusted enough to get into government or wherever else that Red Hat is currently dealing. You then become a downstream of someone else who is making those decisions for you, and what does that do to your reputation in terms of those places where you've gotten your foot in the door? It probably doesn't help you, right? So Red Hat, Oracle, if they do simply rebuild the source, and again, I don't know that, but if they do rebuild the source RPMs, Oracle, like the other distributions, are riding on the coattails of RHEL's reputation. If you flip that, there is no reputation, and all open source loses. Right? Do you believe that this was a 6 month thing, or do you believe that this was kind of the plan for the last 2 years? That hey, we're going to move this chess piece here, we'll move that chess piece here. I mean, for all of the defending I've done, and God knows I've done my share of defending of Red Hat over the past few weeks. At the same time, I'm not entirely buying that they shifted CentOS Stream around, and then 2 years later went, here's another thing. I'm kind of wondering if this wasn't all planned, at the get-go. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I've just, I like calling a thing a thing. I doubt it. It's possible, right? I don't have any knowledge. So I know Mike McGrath just because I work at the same company. Aside from that, I have no other knowledge of what's happening, how those decisions are being made, despite the fact that Red Hat follows what's called the Open Decision Framework. That doesn't mean that they tell us everything and we all get a vote in what happens. Sure. So especially from where I sit, I'm so far removed from this in my place in Red Hat. So I could absolutely see, I know some of the processes in Red Hat and some of them are long vision. Some of them, however, are we're going to make this decision and then we're going to reevaluate every 3 months and see where we're at and course correct, because Red Hat, as a general rule, in my experience, really does believe in fail fast, which means you don't make that long 5-year plan and never revisit it. It's, chart a course, check, fail. Okay. Adjust the course, check, fail again. Those sorts of things. So I absolutely could see this being not initially part of the original intent.
We'll take a stop in the Linux Newswire newsroom, get the latest from JT, and then Bradley Kuhn will join the Ask Noah show next.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of July 9th, 2023, here's the Linux and open source news. BlendOS v3, codenamed Batura, has now been released, with a host of new features, including the ability to switch between 7 desktop environments easily and instantaneously with a new system track command. Solus 4.4, codenamed Harmony, has been released with secure boot support. The RC1 release of the 6.5 kernel has been released, and Bcache FS didn't make it into 6.5 due to heated discussions, and Linus has asked for calm while the work is completed. China's Ubuntu rebrand called OpenKylin has officially released its version 1.0 release. The open source game engine Godot has released the first major update to their version 4 release. And Oracle has weighed in on the Red Hat Linux source access drama by sardonically telling Red Hat to rely on Oracle as their upstream. Cavo is an open source social media system to allow content creators to own their data. The platform will be community funded and AI bots will be treated as first-class citizens. The designer of Arcavo, Paul Flynn, has said that Arcavo will use a model similar to Wikipedia, funded by the community with open source code that lets developers write the features they're looking for. Paul says removing the monetization aspects that commercial platforms have enables the privacy component of users owning their own data. In security news, Rikubi is a backdoor malware that targets vulnerable Linux servers and has been known to be in use by the Chinese APT31 team. Rikubi is an older malware, around since 2015, but researchers are seeing an uptick in its use thanks to recent updates to the malware. Technical information has emerged for a serious vulnerability affecting multiple Linux kernel versions that could be triggered with minimal capabilities. The security issue is being referred to as stack rot, and can be used to compromise the kernel and elevate privileges. A patch worked on by Linus himself is available for affected stable kernels and has been available since July 1st. Full details about the issue, along with complete exploit code, are expected to be released by the end of the month. Stack rot impacts all kernel configurations on Linux versions 6.1 through 6.4. And in hardware news, Zythian 5 is a standalone open-source music-making device that contains 50 synth engines and hundreds of effects. It is built around a Raspberry Pi and has an open hardware design. And Linux laptop vendor Tuxedo has announced their new Stellaris 17 Linux laptop, which they claim is the fastest notebook hardware on the planet. The 5th gen Stellaris 17 laptop ships with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090 and an Intel Core i9 13900HX. And lastly, it may have taken 30 years, but according to StatCounter's data, by July 2023, Linux has achieved a 3% desktop market share.
Bradley Kuhn. He is a policy fellow at the Software Freedom Conservancy. Bradley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Welcome in.
Thank you, Noah, for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. So I wanted to get your thoughts on Red Hat and the situation that is unfolding, because as a policy fellow at the SFC, what you guys do is you're a public watchdog. You keep an eye on companies and projects and make sure that they stay in compliance with the GPL. So I want to start before any of this happened, even at Red Hat. What, if any, concerns did you and the SFC have with Red Hat and their business model and its relationship to community-oriented free and open source software?
So I think everybody in the community that really follows how the GPL works closely has been concerned for a very long time. The Red Hat business model, I think, is best described as if you exercise your rights under the GPL, your money is no good here. And what that means is that if you receive a copy of RHEL as part of your RHEL service and you receive the updates, and you choose to exercise the rights under the GPL, so you choose to make copies, you would choose to install it on other machines, you would choose to make modifications, what Red Hat can do under their agreement is they can fire you as their customer. And this is all well and good, one would think, but it certainly has a weird series of aspects with regard to how it ends up interacting with the GPL. And there's actually a lot of debate, Noah, in the free and open source software community, and has been since 2002, about whether this business model actually complies with the GPL or not.
So from your perspective, how does RHEL comply with, or at that point, how did RHEL comply with the business model? I mean, obviously they must have to a point, because there weren't a lot of widespread cases. There wasn't a lot of widespread litigation against Red Hat. To the degree that you believe that they did, how were they following or complying with the GPL?
Well, I think Red Hat's behavior has varied over time, and it's been quite confusing. It's often hard in a situation like this to really monitor their behavior, because most of the agreements are made secretly with their customers. They're not known to the public most of the time. Now, there are a number of the RHEL agreements that are public, and if you look at those closely, it's pretty interesting. What they effectively say is nothing in these agreements, no matter what they say, contradicts your right under the open source licenses to do the things the open source license promise. So from that kind of 10,000 foot level, it's clear that it complies, because they've admitted that if there's a discrepancy between the RHEL contract and agreement you have with Red Hat and the GPL or some other open source license, the GPL or that other open source license wins. The terms of that apply, not the terms of the RHEL agreement. So in sort of the general theory of it, it's all okay. In practice, there have been a number of problems that have occurred on the edges of this agreement that I'm happy to talk about if you're curious to know more.
Yeah, please. So can you give me some examples? What has happened and what has been the result of those cases?
So there hasn't been any court case that I'm aware of over the RHEL agreement, but there have been a number of skirmishes, if you will, about issues that have come up. The really general one is somewhere around the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006. People would come up to me at conferences, open source events, those sorts of things. I do a lot of speaking at those kind of events. Very excited they're coming back now, finally, as the pandemic begins to wane. But people would come up to me and they'd say, "Hey, so this Linux stuff's open source, right?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And they'd say, "There's some license, the GPL, you have rights to copy it and all that." And I'd say, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, why is it that my company has to buy seat licenses to run Linux?" And I'd say, "What are you talking about?" And they'd say, "Well, we had to buy a bunch of seat licenses for RHEL, and we have to pay them for every copy we install." And I say, well, it's interesting that you believe that, because in fact, the agreements, assert your right to copy, modify, and redistribute the software into the GPL. But what had happened was, when the sales folks from Red Hat pitched it to the software acquisition people at their company, all they did was talk about the seat licenses that they were going to buy. And it's one of these situations where it's like, well, if a GPL violation, to mix metaphors a bit, falls in the woods and nobody knows it happened because everybody thought something else was going on, is there anybody there to hear it? Do they really know it happened? And that's what I saw was happening with a lot of these companies, that they were truly convinced that they had to buy a seat license to run RHEL, even though the RHEL agreements don't even say that. They don't use the word seat license, but that's what the salespeople would say. And we saw a number of other incidences around the business model that came up. One of the examples that hopefully in the show notes you can link to the blog post where I describe this in more detail. But we were contacted by a company a few years ago, and they were both a RHEL customer, an enterprise RHEL customer, so they had servers in their data center, but they also sold products that had Linux in them. And they had used a couple of RHEL source packages in one of their products. And the RHEL salespeople became aware of this, and I was privy to, after the fact, see an email exchange where the Red Hat salespeople were demanding a royalty for that product, because they said, well, it has RHEL in it, so you have to pay us a royalty. Now, this particular company was a large company and had very savvy lawyers, and they argued back pretty hard that they did not have to pay a royalty. And in the end, that matter was resolved simply because the company in question pushed back. But if they had been a much smaller company, I don't think they would have had the ability to push back in that scenario.
What's interesting about this to me, Bradley, is that when you look at Canonical and Ubuntu, there are a number of projects that have forked Ubuntu source code and used it for all sorts of manner of things, and there doesn't ever really seem to be a huge kerfluffle. There's, if you have official blessed flavors and stuff, that's a whole different discussion. But if you just want to take Ubuntu and fork it and do something with it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hoopla about that. Can you help me understand what is required from code obtained from Red Hat in order to be able to use it under the GPL? If I wanted to take Red Hat source code and I wanted to use it, what would I have to do to stay in compliance with the GPL?
So Red Hat's required at least for the packages in RHEL that are GPL, which would include the Linux kernel itself, which of course is under GPL, and any other program that they put into RHEL and package for RHEL that's under even not just GPL, but LGPL, any of the copyleft style of open source licenses. They're going to be required to give you the complete corresponding source code, and they're required under penalty of violating the license to give you all the tools you need to reinstall it, to rebuild it, all that sort of thing. So you have to be able to get that. The conundrum that people find themselves in is that if they choose to exercise those rights, they have to be ready for Red Hat to cancel their service contract. So it's kind of almost a fear situation where they're afraid to lose their business relationship with Red Hat, so they just choose not to exercise those rights. But when you line it up to the other distributions, your rights are basically the same. It's this gray area with this business model where people are afraid to exercise those rights that were guaranteed to them because it's so important for them to keep a business relationship with Red Hat.
One of the things I'm seeing consistently misrepresented on the internet, I'm going to ask you this point blank. Does the GPL require Red Hat to make the source code publicly available? That is to say, outside of a paywall. Is that part of the GPL requirement?
Absolutely not. And Red Hat on this particular point is absolutely correct. The GPL has never required in any version, and I don't know of any copyleft license that does require this, that the source code be made available to the general public at all times, notwithstanding what's called the general public license. What it requires is that when you receive the software in a distribution of any kind, when you have a copy of the software, one of two things have to happen. Either one, you have to be given the source code at the exact same time that the binary was given to you, right alongside that binary, and that source code has to include the scripts used to control compilation and installation of the executable and all the other things GPL defines as source code. And your other option is you can make an offer for source, and that offer for source, and this is where people get confused about the public thing, that offer for source has to be valid to any third party. So that means, Noah, if I had a copy of RHEL and I gave you the binaries and I said, oh, I got this offer letter from Red Hat for the source code, I'm allowed to pass that offer letter on to you, Noah, and you could go ask for the source code. So that's why the offer has to be valid to any third party, because that offer could be passed around among the non-commercial redistributors of RHEL. But there's never a requirement that they just put it on the internet, and it was within their rights, absolutely, to choose kind of capriciously, sometimes to put it on the internet and sometimes not to. So I want to be really clear that I think people have been unfair to Red Hat on that point, because they aren't required to make the source code public. They're required to give it to the people who request it through a valid offer, or for people who have received the binaries themselves.
So Red Hat's only obligated to give the source code to customers of theirs. So then the question becomes, Bradley, why is having to be a Red Hat customer to obtain the source code a problem for GPL compliance, or maybe I'll say the life cycle of open source?
Right. I think it's a really good question the way you framed it there, because my biggest concern with the Red Hat business model, the RHEL business model specifically, I don't like to, I mean, even though I've spent my whole career focused on GPL compliance, I don't think that's the most important thing to think about. I think the most important thing to think about is not, does it meet the bare minimum requirement to be compliant with the GPL? Because I don't know about you, but when I was in school, I didn't want to get a C. I wanted to get an A if I could. I wanted to do the best I could. I didn't want to just pass. And so I think when anytime a company starts thinking of, well, what's the bare minimum I have to do to comply with the GPL? I just want to do the bare minimum. They're not really thinking about the open source community and what the open source community needs. If they really care about open source, they should be like, I want to do above and beyond what the GPL requires. I want to do more because I want to participate in this great community that's building this great software, and I want my engineers to be part of that community. So we want to do above and beyond. So I would hope Red Hat would want to do above and beyond. It's unfortunate that they're kind of focused on this bare minimum question. And I think that's what it comes down to, Noah, because when we look at what Red Hat's doing with RHEL, what they're saying is, well, don't really want a collaboration around the RHEL source code base itself. We kind of want to control that almost like it's a proprietary operating system. And we only want to interact with our customers about that. And this vilifying of people who are rebuilders, in the end, Red Hat's a rebuilder of all this other open source stuff. They're downstream from that. Yes, they absolutely employ some great engineers who do work upstream on many of those projects, but not all of them. So they're a consumer and a redistributor and a repackager and rebuilder of open source as well. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous from my point of view for Red Hat to argue, well, rebuilders are a problem. Rebuilders are what made open source happen. Lots of people coming together and saying, I'm going to use this source code in a different way. I'm going to build it into my product in a different way. And we built our community around that. And that's why business and open source is successful. And I think to some extent, Red Hat's kind of forgotten that as a big part of their DNA and their history.
But to be clear, simply requiring somebody to be a Red Hat customer to obtain the source code isn't necessarily a problem for GPL compliance then.
It's certainly a problem with regard to the spirit of the GPL. It's a debated debated issue that people are arguing about whether it complies with the GPL. Red Hat is really the only one who has crafted a business model like this so well crafted that you look at it and you're not sure whether it complies with the GPL. But like I said, I think about the spirit of the whole thing. One of the things that's in the Red Hat agreements is that they can audit you at any time to see how many copies of RHEL you're running. And if you're running even more than one copy of what you paid for, they cancel your support contract if they find just one extra copy sitting in your data center that you didn't pay for support for. And so that kind of thing, that's what the Business Software Alliance used to do in the 1990s. They would come into your agency and see how many copies of Microsoft Windows you were running. If you had an unlicensed copy, you were in big trouble. And so the spirit of that is just not in the spirit of open source. Maybe it complies with the GPL, maybe it doesn't. I've been looking at this business model for 20 years in my career as a GPL expert, and I don't have an answer for you. It might comply. It might not. I don't know. It probably depends on the details. I've seen cases in the RHEL business model that were non-compliant happen on the edges. Like I talked about that example just now, and there's other examples that I've wrote up in my blog post. So I'm pretty concerned because Red Hat's clearly living on the edge, the bare minimum of GPL compliance if they are compliant. And I think they should stop living on the edge of the bare minimum and they should try to get an A in open source, not a C.
So there's at least no clear evidence that being a Red Hat customer is a violation to the GPL. It's at least debated. Does the GPL require the author to maintain a relationship with any particular user, I guess? And so in order to get the source code, you'd have to have a relationship with that company. Does that present a problem for you? Do you see a problem with that?
So it's certainly true. I mean, that's why when you look at the business model from the 10,000 foot level, it seems compliant, right? It's if you choose to exercise your rights under GPL, your money's no good here. It's certainly, I don't think a requirement of the GPL to maintain a business relationship with anybody, and there's nothing in the GPL that I see that mandates maintaining a business relationship. But when you get in these situations where you're using phrases like seat license and royalty in your sales force, when you talk to the people you're selling to, you're certainly creating a lot of confusion, and you're certainly giving folks the impression that they don't have the rights that they ought to have under the GPL. And that really concerns me, that kind of rhetoric does get used, from what was been reported to me from Red Hat customers. The other thing I want to note, Noah, that's really important is Red Hat's main concern is how many support contracts you're paying for. And that's a totally reasonable problem. Red Hat in its early days had this problem where big institutions would buy exactly one support contract, and then they put somebody on staff just to call Red Hat all day and ask for support. And they were just paying for, one measly support contract when they had thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of servers. I think it's totally reasonable for Red Hat to say, well, if you have that many of our servers running our software and you want support from us, you got to pay more for the support. And I have no problem with Red Hat pursuing a business relationship that says we should get paid more when you need more support. Totally makes sense to me. But the problem comes in when they tie that to the issues of how many copies of the software that you're running. And the other thing is what's the problem if somebody redistributes the source code on the internet themselves? So imagine a great example. Somebody's a Red Hat customer. They're paying for exactly the number of support contracts as server they have. But what they choose to do is every week they decide to post the source code on the internet, which is totally their right under GPL. Red Hat seems to have a problem with that. They don't say it's a GPL violation because it's not. They don't say it's a violation of the Red Hat service agreement because it's not. But they seem to want to keep that source code from quickly making its way into the hands of what they call rebuilders. And I think they should stop trying to prevent that. I think they should encourage rebuilders to get that source code quickly out of RHEL and make other products. Obviously, they can't call it Red Hat. They can't call it RHEL. That would be a trademark. My understanding, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that would be a trademark infringement. And absolutely Red Hat should say, you can't infringe our trademarks. You can't call this RHEL. But if Rocky or Alma or somebody else wants to make something that's very much like RHEL, built on the sources as RHEL released yesterday, I would think an open source company would want to encourage that because they want to see their code reused, because that's what open source is about.
Do you think there's a problem with users being cheap and wanting Red Hat to effectively do all of the work and then they can copy and benefit without making any meaningful contributions back upstream?
Well, I think Red Hat's historical enemy is actually Oracle. I am no fan of Oracle. I think they're a horrible company that's done a lot of horrible things in the software industry, and their primary business is not open source, it's proprietary. And I'm sympathetic to Red Hat when they say, look, Oracle is out there going to our customers saying, you should buy Unbreakable Linux. And I'm sympathetic that it's difficult to deal with bad actors like Oracle, because Oracle can find a way to get the source code and make a RHEL-like product and try to convince customers to switch to whatever they call it these days. They used to call it Unbreakable or Unfakeable Linux, whatever it was. And I'm totally sympathetic to Red Hat on that. But on the other hand, when you release stuff as open source, you end up having to let your competitors do certain things because it's what the open source license require that you really wish they wouldn't do. And it's easier to prevent them from doing that if the software is proprietary. But those of us in the open source community, like the many engineers at Red Hat, have made a decision. Well, we'd rather have the collaboration, have the wonderful effects of sharing our software as open source. And therefore we have to kind of tolerate these annoying people like Oracle who are trying to free ride on great work that Red Hat's doing. And while I'm sympathetic, I also think that when it comes to whether we have to deal with Oracle being annoying or make sure everybody gets the best possible open source distributions and rights under open source licenses, I'm always going to go with the rights under the open source license, even if it makes some problems in other ways.
I wanted to get your thoughts on CentOS. So CentOS, prior to Red Hat taking over the project in 2014, you've said in your blog post you believe that was an important asset to the community. Can you take me briefly through why CentOS prior to Red Hat taking over in 2014 was an important asset?
So the great thing about the pre-Red Hat controlled CentOS was for folks like me who are worried about the compliance issues of a business model like RHEL, it let me sleep at night very easily. Because I knew the folks in the CentOS community, I'd met many of them and talked to them, and I knew what they were doing was they had various ways from various different customers who would give them the source code from RHEL releases as they came out. And then they would build the CentOS release based on the RHEL sources they got from various Red Hat customers who were, in some cases, surreptitiously, but completely permitted under the GPL, giving them copies of the source code. And this was kind of a check and balance on RHEL. I always felt, while CentOS was an independent distribution, as long as it was keeping up with the RHEL releases, I was like, well, if there are problems around the RHEL business model on the edges, if there are some GPL compliance problems, as long as the community has a good, solid clone distribution that's based on the RHEL sources and it's coming out quickly after the RHEL releases, there's probably not too much harm done because the community is getting what they need. Individual users who are never going to buy a RHEL license can get the same software, which I think is really important to think about because there are lots of people who want to run a RHEL-like system, but they're just doing it because they want to run their own servers because they're just individuals excited about Linux. Those people are going to want something like that, and CentOS provided it to them. What happened when CentOS was taken over by Red Hat, which they basically did by making these large, job offers to key people in the CentOS community, because CentOS was kind of a true anarchistic open source community. There was no entity to obtain, really. It was just hiring everybody who was working on it. And then they got control of the brand. And then they turn the brand into something else. When they talk about CentOS Stream today, that's nothing like what CentOS was when it was independent. And so that created this imbalance. And I'm very excited to see things like Alma and Rocky, because they're other entities that can create a better balance to be able to be a watchdog along with our organization at the Software Freedom Conservancy on the behavior of the RHEL business model, and just make sure that it's complying with the GPL and that the community is getting what they need.
Why would it not be possible for Alma, Linux, and Rocky to partner up with some Red Hat customers and obtain the source code in a similar way?
I think it could be possible. I think that's up to Alma and Rocky. The concern that I have is that auditing aspect of the RHEL agreements. So any customer who does that, any customer who passes the source code along to somebody else, basically has to live in fear that the Red Hat audit is coming. And I can understand and am sympathetic to a customer who says, you know what, my business relationship with Red Hat's important. I depend on RHEL every day to do my business, and I can't risk violating that agreement. And I can totally get, well, I'm all about the GPL rights. I don't care about the RHEL agreement. I can totally understand that's flipped for the average Red Hat customer. They look at the RHEL agreement, they look at the GPL, and they say, well, technically I'm allowed to redistribute the source code if I want to help out Rocky and Alma, but I think I'm going to just choose not to because that RHEL agreement's so important to me. And I'm sympathetic to that, but it also looks like a certain amount of intimidation, that intimidation of the Red Hat audit team could show up at any time and check what I've done with the RHEL source code. I think that's really, really tough for businesses to be put in that situation. It's just not in the spirit of open source, in my opinion.
What would you say the role of distributions like Rocky and Alma are today in the ecosystem?
I think they're incredibly important. There is no question in anybody's mind. We wouldn't be having this discussion if RHEL were not one of the most important Linux distributions in existence. Everybody agrees that RHEL is really important. Red Hat's done amazing work putting it together. They employ amazing engineers. Many of the engineers are great friends of mine, have been friends of mine for 20 years. I'm very proud of the work they do, and they're very proud of the work they do because they do all open source. So everybody agrees RHEL is really important. And I think that in that kind of ecosystem, you don't want a monoculture. My colleague, Jeremy Allison, wrote this wonderful blog post this week where he talked about one of the reasons Red Hat was successful, in his opinion, and I think he's right, was that they were an alternative to the Unix vendors of their day. They were saying, we're creating something that's not locked up like Unix was. You don't have just one vendor. You have lots of vendors for the same software you can choose from. We Red Hat would say to you, well, we think we're the best vendor for you to go to work with, but there's lots of other options. And I think that that's the real promise of open source, is that a customer can say, you know what? I think I'd rather have somebody else support this software. And since it's open source, I can hire anybody I want on the free market to support that software for me because they have equal access to the source code. What the RHEL business model tries to do is it tries to disrupt the access to source code by these various different edge case factors that it introduces into the ecosystem. So I think Rocky and Alma are really important because they create a true open source ecosystem again in a place where, unfortunately, Red Hat's trying to reduce the amount of open source ecosystem that's there around RHEL.
If you woke up in Red Hat's shoes, what from your perspective could Red Hat do, if anything, that could resolve this situation and kind of bury the hatchet, so to speak?
Well, I think I'd really like to see Red Hat just go back to making the RHEL sources public. I think this dancing around the CentOS stream and saying it's there if you look hard enough, but you have to get a magnifying glass out and figure out, making people do that extra make work. It's just not in the spirit of open source. It doesn't matter whether we argue about whether it's compliant with the GPL. It's just not what open source people do. They put their stuff out there and they share it with their co-developers, even if their co-developers don't work at the same company. And I think Red Hat had a knee-jerk reaction here. I think it's more about Oracle than it is about anybody else. And like I said, I'm totally sympathetic on the Oracle situation. But in the end, I don't think they should be treating these small-time folks who are just trying to do things. A lot of the people who are involved in Alma's a trade association of a bunch of really tiny companies, companies with 2 and 3 and 4 employees. They are not a threat to Red Hat's business model. They don't need to be afraid of little companies with a couple people working for them. They're a big, powerful company owned by IBM. They have lots of ability to make money. And I think that if they just went back to the way of collaborating in public over the RHEL distribution, I think that's in the best interest of the whole community. And I'd be surprised if it impacted their bottom line all that much. They're arguing that it does, but they also haven't put out detailed numbers to show the community that that's the case. And that they can't, their argument is they can't pay engineers if they don't do it this way. And I'm just not convinced by that argument. I can't take it on faith. They'd have to prove that to the community for us to really consider that as a valid argument.
What kind of numbers would demonstrate that? So if somebody from Red Hat were listening to this and they said, okay, that seems reasonable. You know what? We absolutely have the data to back that up. What kind of numbers would present a compelling argument? What would you like to see? Well,
I think they'd have to show that the RHEL business would collapse because the source code's available, right? Because I'm not a fan of unbridled capitalism, right? I don't think you should be able to make as much money as you want in any way that you want. There should be some types of controls that benefit the community. The GPL, in some sense, is one such control on unbridled capitalism, because if Linux weren't under the GPL, you could make a wholly proprietary operating system with Linux inside, and you wouldn't have to give anybody any source code to anything. And so I think what Red Hat would really have to show is, hey, we would go out of business if we couldn't do this. And I think my instincts say that's not the case, because for years this source code has been available. It was available through CentOS because of the mechanism CentOS was using in the pre-Red Hat control of CentOS days. It was made available by Red Hat for years and years here, after they had CentOS, and it's only recently been pulled back. And Red Hat, as far as I know, is doing fine. IBM paid a lot of money to acquire Red Hat. So I can't imagine that Red Hat was doing so badly when the source code was publicly available. Yes, Oracle probably beats them in some sales because they can have unbreakable Linux, but Oracle's going to figure out a way to get the source code one way or another, because they're pretty shady, Oracle as a company. And so I don't think it's going to stop them anyway. And they might as well just collaborate with the community, because I believe fundamentally in the rising tide raises all boats philosophy of open source, that the more people that want a RHEL-like system, the more good that's going to be for Red Hat. Maybe not this quarter, maybe not next quarter, but in the long term for RHEL, if people are running Rocky and Alma, many of them are going to get unhappy with Rocky and Alma and say, you know what, let's switch it all to RHEL and just pay Red Hat for it. That will happen. It will be a feeder, I think, for new customers for them. And the big companies are just going to buy RHEL anyway, as they always have. So I just think they'd have to prove somehow that they're actually going to go out of business, which I think is not the case.
If people are listening to this and they want to dig into this issue deeper, they want to learn more from the SFC or from you, where would you send them?
A couple of places. So certainly, I'm sure you'll link to my blog post and Jeremy Allison's blog post in the show notes, which folks can read more about that. And I also want to let people know a really great opportunity. I know it's short notice. We just put this together, obviously, because this event, these issues just started coming up in the press just a few weeks ago. But we have a conference going on called FALSI in Portland, Oregon next week. July 14th is one of the days of the conference. And on that morning at the conference, we're going to have a keynote panel discussion, including myself and some folks from various different organizations involved in this. Alma and Rocky are both confirmed. We've also invited Red Hat to come to join the conversation. We haven't heard back from them yet, but I think it'll be a great opportunity if people happen to be able to get to Portland for the event. It's not very expensive, and they might enjoy themselves at the many things going on at the FALSI event in Portland, Oregon, on July 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. And then if they can't make it, we're going to be recording that, and then there'll be a recording of that panel discussion available after the fact, and so folks can watch it. So I hope people will follow this issue closely, and I really hope that news that's come out about it is not the end of the story for everybody. This has been an issue in the open source community of this RHEL business model and the GPL since 2002. It ebbs and flows in interest in the open source community, but I encourage people to pay attention to it. The GPL is such an important document in the rights of Linux users and open source users of all kinds that are under these licenses. And I encourage folks to watch Software Freedom Conservancy's website, sfconservancy.org. We're always posting new articles and stuff about issues of GPL compliance and these kinds of policy issues that come up. And I hope people will take a peek at that and follow it, even when it's not the big news, because there's lots of interesting things going on in this realm of open source policy.
Bradley Kuhn, he is a policy fellow at the Software Freedom Conservancy and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Bradley, I thank you so much for taking the time. We'll get you back on the program real soon.
Thank you, Noah, and thanks for doing this kind of in-depth reporting on open source. I'm so glad your show's out there doing that.
We'll have his blog post linked in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. So a couple of points I wanted to touch on with you, Steve. The first being, so you're a person that's in corporate environments day in and day out. Do you see RHEL boxes that don't have seat license and RHEL coming after customers for running boxes that aren't authorized, or is that more of a support thing?
So we are 100% based on the support that you provide to us. So if you have gone and obtained a copy of RHEL 9.2 or whatever the latest one is, and you don't pay for support beyond whatever point, you can still use RHEL 9.2 in perpetuity forever. It just means you can't get the updates and you can't call in for support. I have not only have I seen, I have worked for places where we just stand up a RHEL box. We can't update it, but maybe we don't need to update it because of whatever its function is. I have been in clients where there are a significant number of machines that are not hooked into Subscription Manager. So there's a difference here between what Brad was saying about seat licenses and what we're talking about in terms of Subscription Manager. So for people that don't know, what happens is if you just install base RHEL and you don't add in any of your subscription information during the installation or whatever, you don't have any Yum repositories. However, that doesn't mean you can't add your own. Should
like
you know where they're at.
ones or Alma ones or Rocky ones.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to do that as a supplement, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I've worked at places where like Apple, for example, would be one of the ones that I would add. And you can get a long way with all of those sort of things. So the point is that Subscription Manager is used to populate all of the RHEL archives and to verify that you have a support agreement for X number of machines. Now, that in and of itself is not a problem. Now, I will disclaim this by saying I am not the one that is in charge of handling these sorts of things at Red Hat. I am only making observations. What is a problem, however, is when you use something like Satellite or Spacewalk, or there are a bunch of other types of repositories that you can essentially use to cache the packages so that you're not pulling directly off of Red Hat. If you plug your unsubscribed machines into your own repository, that definitely gets murky in a hurry, because the whole agreement is you have, whatever your license expired for the number of installs that you did, that's the time where your support ends. If you go and plug those into official support channels via your own repository. So let's say you pay for a license for 10 support licenses, and you've got 20 machines, and you've decided that you're going to move the repository for those 10 in-house. Moving that in-house is fine. Doesn't matter, right? That's perfectly legit and under the situation. But if you plug in those extra 10 machines and they then start getting updates, that's where there's a breach of support. And again, I don't work in this area, but if there was a significant enough number of machines in that level of violation, that's when a Red Hat audit, in my estimation, would come into play. So there's a difference between hey, I just grabbed the RHEL ISO and spun up a VM, but I didn't subscribe it with the subscription manager. That's completely different than I have a bunch of machines that I just stood up and I'm plugging it into my own update infrastructure, which is bypassing the, it's not even a EULA. They don't want us to call it that because it's not an end user license agreement. That has a different connotation. But like the service level agreement that you have with Red Hat, you're going around that by doing that process. So that is my slightly higher than layman's understanding of what's happening with the subscriptions.
Where do you think this goes from here, Steve? You think eventually the internet just kind of quiets down and life back to normal as these other companies, and we'll check in with Alma and we'll check in with Rocky, so we'll find out where they are. But I mean, they'll all just kind of land somewhere and then life as usual, or what do you think the end result will be?
Well, I mean, what else can the end result be? At the end of the day, even Brad himself has said that Red Hat is not it's not in breach of compliance with the GPL. So what are you going to do? You're going to whinge forever and hope that your whinging will compel a multi-billion-dollar company to bend to your will? Like, that's not usually how corporate business deals work. Now, I can't speak to any of those decision-making situations, and I will say that there's a large number of Red Hatters who are sympathetic and perhaps would have liked to have seen a different path or a different way of communicating the message. But that doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, there's nowhere for people to go. It'll be in the hype cycle for a while, just like the CentOS Stream thing was. That one went on for multiple months, but eventually died away, right? And this will die away too. Eventually, it's either there'll be a resolution, or there will just be an acceptance of this is how life is as we move forward.
I wanted to give you guys an update on Beeper. So I got my acceptance as an invitation into Beeper 2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks now. And so coming in, I've lived on Beeper for the last week, and here is my takeaway. So last week I told you the things I was looking to get out of this: long-term connection with people, ease of access to a FOSS solution, and an easy on-ramp for other people. So as it relates to a long-term connection with people, it absolutely enables me to get to people on platforms that I ordinarily wouldn't be on. So I have reconnected with people on LinkedIn and Facebook and apps that I didn't even have. Like I said, one of the most interesting bridges was iMessage, because instantaneously it gets you access to half of the thing, and you get access to half of US mobile people that have phones in their pockets, and they have done the work to host Macs in their data center so that you can use that service. So I think that's pretty cool. The other thing is it has this coveted single point of contact for messages. And so I don't have to care what your flavor of ice cream is. You're just a matrix message to me. So that part, it absolutely wins on. And just like email, my problem is I'm never going to be comfortable with an endpoint that I give out to people that is outside of my control. So until account portability becomes a thing, if the matrix ID ends with something that somebody else controls, that doesn't really get me there. It feels like I'm going to end up moving at some point, and it won't be my thing, my corner of the world. So that's where I think it kind of falls down. I think it hits the first 2 points, able to reach out to platforms where I wouldn't have, and does bring all the messages into one place, but I'm a little comfortable with that endpoint not being something that I'm in control of. It would be great if I could sign up for all the Beeper bridges and then point them to whatever matrix account I want. For the second thing, ease of access to a FOSS solution. So when I started, it worked with Element. Then I bridged all of the things and stopped working with Element. I was okay with that because, frankly, their UI is flipping spectacular when it comes to dividing up all these networks. I tried doing the bridges myself on my Linux Delta server, and it works. All the messages come to my Linux Delta account, but they're all jumbled up and mixed with each other, and I can't tell one from the other, and it's particularly terrible if the group is double bridged. Like there's the bot that sits in the room that relays back and forth, because then I'm in the Telegram group as well as I'm in the Matrix group, and then I get 2 messages for every. It's just a mess. Beeper doesn't have any of that. In fact, they have the UI allows you to have this unread inbox. They call it the inbox, and you click on inbox and click on unread, And if I get a LinkedIn message, it comes into the inbox. And if I get a Matrix message, it comes into the inbox. And I get a Facebook message, it comes into the inbox. And I can choose to go into any platform, and then I see all of the chats. But by default, I have thousands and thousands of chats that I'm in across all of these networks, and I see none of them unless there's activity in them. And I can choose which ones I want to hit the inbox and which ones I don't. So again, that single pane of glass, that part works. The problem that I ran into is it, at least for the middle period, it appeared that you had to use their client, which wasn't ideal. Today, as I was kind of writing up my thoughts in my review for tonight, I tried it again with Element and it's back to working again. So I don't know. I guess it's hit or miss. And then as far as an easy on-ramp for other people, this to me is where Beeper gets a 10 out of 10. So it is flawless to sign up. Flawless. It walks you through. Their wizard is so good. It is just like opening up some very curated, like an Apple product. You open it up and it's got the experience taken out of a box or something like that, or WhatsApp, or any of these things that have a very nice, gentle on-ramp to show you how to use the thing you're about to use. Beeper has that in spades. I have had no technical issues. Can't decrypt this message, can't move this, can't join this room. None of that. It is great. And the UI is gorgeous. It looks like an app that normal people want to use, not that geeks want to use. So that's overall where I've kind of landed on it at this point. As far as the bridges in large part are never going to be perfect, in part because it's outside of Beeper's control. They have to work with what other services have available to them. And when those services change their API, the way they use it, or their terms of service, or what they're going to block, all of these things come into effect, and it's entirely outside of Beeper's control. And I know that, but at the same time, hosting the bridges myself, you don't get a message for a while. And of course, you don't notice because you're not going to notice not getting something, right? And all of a sudden somebody said, well, I tried to reach out to you. I tried to send this. Oh man, that didn't work. And then you look and, oh yeah, the bridge was down for a little bit or whatever it is. And it's a very embarrassing, frustrating experience. And it starts to make you look like children with toys. Beeper solves that in part because what they do is they put little X's on each of the network. And so if a network goes down, like I lose my Facebook bridge or my iMessage bridge or my Twitter bridge or whatever, puts a little X right there and tells you this bridge is down. So I kept track. iMessage went down once, had to manually sign in. Signal went down once, I had to sign in. Signal's a real pain to sign back in because you have to install it on mobile and take a picture of the QR code. Messenger, it disconnected twice. One time it just reconnected. I just clicked on the thing, clicked reconnect, and reconnected. The second time I had to go and re-sign in, and Instagram disconnected once. And again, just had to go in there and click sign in, and it signed itself back in. So we'll see how it works. Being aware that the bridge is down is better than just nothing there at all. But it is of interest to note that even a company that is set with the explicit purpose of bridging all of the laces to one place, it's still not absolutely flawless. Now, here's I think my biggest takeaway from the Beeper platform, though, in the 2 weeks that I've been using it. So work great. All of a sudden they publish an update and it crashed constantly. Like, I mean, to the point that they have this really neat report a bug thing, and you click on Beeper help inside of the UI, and it's brilliant. It has search or ask a question. If you type that in, it actually goes through their little AI thing or interfaces to it, and then it'll recommend FAQs or tips and tricks. And if you don't get any of that, you can either share feedback or you can report a problem. In my 20 years in IT, I bet you I've reported thousands of problems at this point to various vendors, and Microsoft Windows alone, I've clicked the little send report, particularly in the XP days. In 20 years, never once, ever heard from anybody of reporting those problems. In fact, nor have I ever seen a problem be fixed because I clicked on the report this problem. Ever. I reported a problem in Beeper when this thing was crashing, and I literally couldn't even make it a minute. And so I took Kazam screen recorder and recorded like a minute. I'm like, watch, let me open the Beeper app. Watch it. 50 seconds later, crashes. See, that's bad. And it took me a couple times just to be able to type something up and copy and paste it real quick and send the report in, and thought, yeah, that'll get me nowhere. I got a response. They keep track of who submits these bug reports, and somebody messages me from Beeper and they're like, hey, so I reported the thing, and they watch the video, and the guy gets back to me. He's like, hey, I saw the thing. Yeah, that's a problem. Happens on KDE. So just switch. Some users have reported it works better if you switch to no, or something to that effect. And of course, my knee jerk reaction is like, well, I'm not getting rid of my desktop environment to use your app, but nice try. But they at least acknowledged there was a problem, And they responded, which is more than I can say for any company ever in the history of time I've been reporting problems in software. Now, there's exceptions for things if you go to their repository and open an issue and stuff like that. But I mean, from within an app, I've never had anybody reach out and contact me and say, hey, we saw this thing, here's the answer. I mean, that's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So, Steve, does it sound, am I closer to the horse being at water, or am I further away after 1 week in?
And stuff like that. I'm definitely going to have to move from GNOME to KDE to try this out now.
No. You're good if you're on GNOME. It doesn't crash on GNOME. It crashes on KDE.
No, I understand. But, if I'm trying to follow Noah's footsteps and live in the panacea, I have to move to Matrix and join the KDE clan. And what else is it that I have to do? I don't know.
You
There's
to be
probably
on
a list.
You can't skip over XMPP. You got to try that out and give that a roll and struggle with that for a little bit.
I have to work with the JMP stuff.
Yes.
And I've got a list of things, right? So I'm just going to throw out everything that I've done in the last, decade and just start over.
That's right.
That sounds pretty good.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're in agreement. So I'm glad to see that this is moving nicely. This is good. The other thing that came across my radar, Steve steered me in the direction of this device called the Home Troller. Now, to be fair to Steve, I think he was like 80% making fun of it and 20% being like, oh, this is kind of cool that this is a product. But essentially, you can learn more at homeseer.com, and we'll have a link for you in the show notes. But essentially, it's a $300 computer that has an Intel Celeron processor, 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, a LAN port, 3 USB, HDMI USB, and some audio. And the idea here is you buy this thing, and it comes preloaded with Windows 10 and this software called Homesteer. Don't know anything about Homesteer. Wouldn't recommend you use it. Think it's a waste of time. Also, Windows 10, terrible idea. But having a box for $300 and a box specifically designed for home automation, they include the little Zigbee Z-Wave stick that you can plug in. That maybe has some interest to me if I could wipe it off and throw Home Assistant on there. Steve, what do you think?
So the first thing would be, what is the controller that they're including with that? Because the value proposition on this seems low to me. Like, we're talking about 4 gigs of RAM and a 64 gig unqualified SSD. Like, is it an NVMe drive? Is it just a plain SSD? Because if it's a plain SSD, that's like $10. So they spent $15 on the RAM and $10 on the hard drive and put it inside of a NUC and charge $300 for it, when you could go get an Odroid, which is arguably far more performant, for $129, and then add your own $4, $15 RAM stick and $10 CPU and be ahead by at least half, with better performance. So not sold on this, especially because, buying a thing, it used to be back in the day, you could only buy a thing with Windows on it. But now you're buying a thing with Windows on it specifically to throw the Windows part of it out. That seems to be like, robbing Peter to pay Paul sort of thing.
Well, the Odroid goes up to 64 gigabytes of RAM. So you go from a machine that would run Home Assistant comfortably, but you could literally virtualize or containerize Home Assistant on the Odroid, presumably, get more performance, more memory, more storage for your money, and have a more open platform.
Plus, it has it's got an extra USB port. So the Seer has 3 USB ports. The Odroid has 4. Seer has 1 LAN port, and the Odroid has 2. And instead, so the Seer has VGA. I don't know why.
For all those VGA HDMI monitors you have laying around.
Right? Whereas the Odroid has HDMI and DisplayPort, as well as the regular 3.5 millimeter jack for audio, and the audio, the SPDIF port, if you remember those.
I'd really like to hear and see what other people have going on. But I tell you, one of the things that drew my attention to this, Steve, is that this is what ordinary people are going to buy, right? Ordinary people are going to go to Amazon.com. They're going to look for the home automation thing that they can buy that connects all of the things together. Home Assistant is a fantastic experience It just needs to be available to normal people. And I think if there is some way that we can do that, either by pairing it with a Raspberry Pi, my Home Assistant's still running on a Raspberry Pi like Gen 2. I mean, it's stupid. And no case or anything like that. We're raw dogging it. It's hanging from the Ethernet cord. It's got a micro USB thing plugged into to a UPS sort of a deal. I mean, we're nothing in the way of well designed here, well engineered. And yet the thing has run flawlessly for, 5 years plus now. So I would like to see this hit more of the mainstream, or at least hopefully.
So I guess the only counter there is they do, right? They have the Home Assistant Blue, and now it's the Home Assistant Orange, which you can buy from Nebukasi. I will grant you it's not on Amazon. I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning for that is. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like, if you just want something to buy that comes with the nice branded Home Assistant logo and the Home Assistant, it even comes with like the Matter radio with it. So, I mean, you can buy it. It's got the nice case. It looks great. Feels nice. Like, it feels like a solid thing. You have to go to the Nebukasa website to get that. So I suppose I'll cede that point. You can't just go to Amazon for it.
Should we get, with all of that out of the way, would you like to get to some feedback?
Yeah, let's answer some questions.
Our first email today comes in from Eric. Eric writes in and says, "Hey, Noah and Steve. Great show. Longtime listener. Really one of my favorite listens every week. I wanted to get your guys' advice on third-party email hosting. I help run a charity foundation, and we're looking to set up email for our domain. I can imagine the nightmare of self-hosting, especially the very intermediate skills. So I was thinking of going the third-party route and thought this might be a good question for the show. The site is hosted at Squarespace, and the recommendation there is to set up Google Workspaces. As an Office IT guy that spends a lot of time administrating Microsoft Office 365, I'd like to stay away from that world. Also, I don't think we need more than email. Ideally, I'd like to find a solid service that focuses on email and not a cloud Office suite, provides support for Linux and open source ecosystem at the front of the line. Are there any services you've used or recommend? I should also note that other users aren't technically inclined, and so I'd like to take the work on their iPhone. Thanks in advance for any suggestions you might have, and thank you very much for the dedication of putting a show together at such a high quality level." So, Steve, if you woke up in his shoes, what would you do for third-party email hosting?
Proton Mail. That's what
really?
I would do.
Even for a business?
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, why would you trust them for your personal email but not a business email? You think that they can't handle that?
Oh, no. I trust them 100%. It's a cost thing. So what I would say is, so so I guess I should define why I think there is a difference. So for me, the security in Proton Mail is only there, obviously, if you're using to or from Proton Mail where there's encryption, right? And so, going back and forth between my wife or going back between my kids, that I'll pay for all day long, and it's absolutely worth it. Love NDN, love Proton Mail, love the entire Proton suite. That's what hosts my personal email, and I love it. At work, though, I use Fastmail, and here's why. Proton Mail, especially if you're trying to get away from, if you're wanting to have non-technical users use some of these things, there are some hoops you'll have to jump through. So, for example, if you want to use Thunderbird on the desktop, you have to install a bridge. The bridge goes out and retrieves your encrypted email, hosts a little local mini IMAP server, then Thunderbird connects to it, and that bridge has to be running in order for Thunderbird to work. So what we've done at work, I go by a couple of things. So my first premise is, at work, all my emails are going to and from another unencrypted party anyway. So there is no point in trying to encrypt my side of it because somebody else has a copy of it anyway. Fastmail, $3 a month, privacy-centered calendar and contacts. When they say privacy-centered, what they mean is they don't actively sell your information. They're still part of the Five Eyes network. So if somebody comes looking for, with a warrant, they're going to be able, and they will, turn over all of the content there. But like I say, at Altispeed anyway, you could go get that from whoever it was we were communicating with, and we don't have anything to hide. We're public, so all of the things, like the privacy really isn't important to me when it, at work for work things, when it comes to encryption over email, there isn't an expectation of privacy there. And if there is, we're using some other mode of communication. But $3 a month per user per account, which is a bit of a price break as compared to Proton Mail, especially if you're using multiple users. And then on top of that, It is an office suite insofar as it's designed to do all of the things that your office is going to need from an email productivity suite. So it's going to do calendar, it's going to do contacts, it's going to do your email itself. It has a web login, or when you go into Thunderbird and just type in your username and password, it'll go and discover all the IMAP stuff and automatically map and do all of the rest of that. As an administrator, I like it because it allows me to do a couple of things. I can either open individual users' inboxes, which is remarkably helpful when you terminate or you have people that turn over, that sort of thing. For certain users, like we have administrative or HR people where I don't want anybody to be able to open their inboxes, you can mark them as a private user, and that removes that functionality from the system administrator so they can't open it. So they kind of give you the best of all worlds. It isn't private. It isn't what I would use if I wanted everything to be encrypted because it doesn't exist. But $3 a month per user per account, 2 gigabytes of storage. It's a pretty solid deal, and it's a great way to get started. They'll walk you through mapping all of the records on your domain and on your site. So they'll go to, mail.yourdomain.com, and then you can put your own brand and your white label on it so nobody knows what it is behind the end. It's a pretty slick system. I think I would look at that and certainly consider Proton Mail. If you have the money for it and you're able to support them in that way, I think that's even better in a lot of ways. I struggle a little bit with the value proposition for business, particularly given what else is out there and given where that mail is going to wind up anyway.
Well, let's be a little bit fair. Like, you're making it sound like it's a mountain and a molehill. Like, so for like $7 a month, it's $7, okay, right? So they have two different ones. So like the $7 a month one is like it's $7 a month per user. So yes, it's more expensive.
By twice, yeah.
It is. It allows 3 different email domains. Every user that you sign up has 10 email addresses that are possible, which is useful. There's 15 gigs a month and per user, and a VPN that's available. Sorry,
you reminded me. That was the other thing that was problematic about Proton Mail. They limit you to how many aliases you can have. So you get 10 and then that's it. With most, and this is true of G Suite, it's true of Office 365, it's true of Fastmail, it's true of most mail services. I can have as many email addresses as I want. What I'm paying for is mail boxes, and Proton does that a little bit differently.
No, you can set up unlimited aliases, right?
We can fight about this off the air, but I've tried, and they limit how many different. Once you get to a limit, you can't add any more addresses that can be forwarded to your Proton Mail. You have to do that outside of Proton.
You're right. We'll have to take this off the air because that's not been my experience.
Okay, we'll fight about it later. Our second email comes in from Jeremy. Jeremy writes in and says, so I've got another soft skill question for you guys. It's become clear to me that I'm just not equipped to deal with oddball personality types. For example, those persons that are randomly say things that make the entire room go silent. Persons that bring up political things into work, or that have very different viewpoints from where I stand. It does seem generally that the social contract used to exist between employer and employee is disintegrating. In past days, it was considered impolite to bring up religion, politics, etc. into the workplace. Now it seems it's commonly accepted, and in one direction, from the employer. I think I have a solid technical skill set, but it's becoming clear that I'm not good at dealing with off-topic type of work discussions, as well as being an office oddball. The only solution I've come up with is constantly mute myself at work. Any tips you have in the workplace? My inability to deal with these types of situations is affecting my career to the point I need a new strategy. So, Steve, this is kind of your wheelhouse. If you woke up in Jeremy's shoes, what would you do?
Every day I wake up in their shoes. There is not a one answer fits everybody to this. I'll try to give you some general pointers. The first thing I always start with is you really have to know yourself. I know, like, it sounds hokey, but it's honest to goodness the truth. It's really, really important that regardless of which methodology that you buy into in terms of understanding personalities and personality types and how you interact and react to each other, you need to figure out where you sit and crystallize that in your mind, because the only way that you're going to come up with strategies that work for you is by actually understanding yourself. What do I mean by that? In short, the way that Noah and I would diffuse a situation is completely different. And if I tried to take Noah's approach, I would fail spectacularly because I can't do that. Just like there are some people that are very good at genuinely being concerned with the other side of the table. And if I tried to do that, I would come across as fake. And there's nothing that sets off people more than being fake. So all that to say is you have to spend some time thinking about who you are and how your personality can interact with people before you can be any kind of successful. Because people, you may think that you're following all of the right tips by any number of wonderful authors out there. And I truly mean that. There's a lot of work out there. But if it doesn't work for your personality, trying to implement somebody else's strategy will fail, regardless of how good it worked for other people. So that said, a lot of the times I get myself out of situations by I have an ability to joke with people, and I will change the subject or make some sort of remark that will get me out of the situation. Further to that, my other favorite go-to is just saying okay. Okay is a non-committal. I'm not like, you can frame this in your brain as I'm not agreeing with you. I'm just acknowledging the fact that you spoke. If the other person chooses to think that you have agreed with them, which is generally the case, they have nowhere to go with that. Right. And so it will get you out of those situations where you're in a political or religious conversation that happens to be happening around you. Right. No one can fault you for being disrespectful if all you say is okay. For the person that is like making the room go silent, there's nothing to say to them. You are not responsible for carrying the conversation for somebody that just comes in and is completely awkward. Let it be awkward.
You can't argue silence.
Yeah, exactly. That is as neutral as you can come. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. What would you do?
So I think I would start by saying that it's important to recognize that our goal should be to be building relationships with people and not agreements with coworkers. This is one of the things that I found. I guess I didn't for the vast majority of my adult life. I've never worked in a corporate environment. I've worked in small business environments, and it hasn't been until recently that I've spent more time inside of corporate environments. And one of the things that really drives me nuts is this concept of coworkers. And it's just, we're here to coexist in the same space, but we don't have to care or know each other or anything like that. And I think it's not conducive to the way people are designed to build relationships. But the other thing I would tell you is sometimes the weird ones are the people most worth investing in. And so what I would encourage you to do, remove the label, dig into the nuance and start asking questions. So I would start by saying I 100% agree with what Steve said. If you want the defensible answer, just don't say anything, because then you're not responsible for anything. You can't be held responsible for something you didn't say. So that's the safe approach. But if you want to be a risk taker, go ask your coworker, why do you Donald Biden is the best president ever. Okay, well, tell me why you like Donald Biden. Well, why is that? I think Donald Biden did X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? And go dig into it. And don't, I'm not suggesting you argue with the person, but go dig in and understand who they are and why they think the way they think. I'll give you an example. I was with a friend of mine, and we went to the grocery store at like 11 o'clock at night, and we went to purchase a pizza and a soft drink. And we went and we got the pizza and we forgot about the Coke. And we got back to my house and we went to throw the pizza in the oven. We went, oh, shoot, we forgot the Coke. Well, this presented a huge predicament because now you can't eat the pizza without the Coke. But at the same time, if we go back to get the Coke, the pizza will burn. And if we take the pizza out and then go get the Coke, then the pizza will be cold by the time we get home. So we did the only logical thing two people could do, which was we took the pizza to the store. So we walk back to the same grocery store. Now, mind you, this is the middle of the night and I live in BFE, North Dakota. So there's like not another person in the store. It's just us. And I walk into this store and the lady that had checked us out, as we're walking back up to the checkout with our soda and this pizza that we've made, she's very upset. And she says something along the lines of like, did you pay for that or did you buy that or something? Which is an obviously silly question because, it's cooked. So that didn't make a lot of sense. And she pretty quickly realizes that and then kind of backs off on it. And we go in and we check out and drank our Coke while we, got the pizza and whatever. So we leave. And every time after that, when I went to that grocery store, she would give me a dirty look. And she was very unhappy and very standoffish and very angry. And about the second or third time, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I paid for the pizza and I paid for the Coke. I could have just went somewhere else and got the Coke if I had known it was that big of a deal. But I took it upon myself as like, I'm going to be exceptionally nice to this woman. And I'm going to see if I can flip her around. And sure enough, wouldn't you know it, after like 6 times of visiting the store and smiling at her and being nice to her and talking to her about her life and asking her how things are going and where she was in her day and that sort of thing, eventually she flipped around. And today, she's friends with my kids and she says hi to them and we're on a great basis and it was fantastic. Now, it took significant effort on my part and there was significant effort on her part not to budge, but eventually kindness won out at the end of the day. So I might suggest you consider anyway going out on a limb. It might totally bite you. It might be a terrible idea. And so if you want the defensible safe answer, then I would 100% go the silent route. But if you want to get crazy and step out on a ledge, then go beat your coworker to death with kindness and see where that gets you.
The other thing that occurred to me while I was listening to Noah was Jeremy, if you think that you have decent social skills, one of the things that will be a benefit to everybody, including your employer, is if you're able to establish a mentorship relationship. This is something that I have done at my own work, because sometimes people who are awkward don't realize they're being awkward, or they are obviously struggling to fit in. There are like four stages to engaging, especially in co-work. I'm not going to get academic here and tell you all 4 of them or anything like that. But one of them is this idea of the need for feeling like they're part of the group. And so some people will hope that floats on their own. Other people are going to try and make that way. Like they're going to try and inject themselves. And that's where the awkwardness comes from. And to those people, I have some level of success helping to mentor and guide them, because the intention is good. Now, there's nothing that you can do if they say something completely loony, like, I was visited by an alien last night and it abducted my dog and then came back for my children. Like, you can't do anything with that. That guy's just kind of crazy. But
you could go help him find his dog.
Well, maybe. But notwithstanding anything like absolutely ludicrous that you find abhorrent, you might take it on yourself to try and mentor that person a little bit. And that's a benefit when it comes to your review time. At least in companies that you want to work for, they will look for how are you giving back. So we pay you to do this thing that you're doing, and that's great. But when you're trying to make the case for a raise or a promotion or something like that, what sets you apart is how you're giving back to the company and showing that you're vested. And helping your coworkers succeed, being a force multiplier, as Red Hat says, that is super valuable to companies. And it's a skill that you can build up even if your current company doesn't doesn't recognize it.
Our third email comes in from Josh. Josh writes in and says, "Hey, Noah and Steve, I thought of an analogy for the Red Hat situation. I don't know if it holds up. Car company A decides to build a car. They don't have to rediscover fire, but they build it on the backs of giants in metallurgy. Computer control, all the things that would build a car. Some parts they build themselves, other parts they buy, and some parts they're given for free. Car company B comes along. They look at car company A and thinks, that's a solid car. We'd like to build something like that. They build a smaller factory beside car company A, and car company A allows them to come and take parts and take boxes, and they even allow them over to their factory to build the car. They even go as far as to say, any of the parts that we have with our branding on them, we'll remove it and allow you to take those parts. Car company A sees financial times are getting difficult. They're having to lay people off and decides they can no longer continue to allow car company B to come over to their shop and take their parts and assemble and put their name on it. So car company A, however, says, here's where we buy our parts. So you can come get them for free and we'll give you that information, or we'll even go as far as to give you all of the CAD files so you can design your own. And it'll allow you to continue to build the car. We just can't give you all of the finished parts anymore that we put together and we paid for. This is how the Red Hat situation seems to me right now. Am I right or am I wrong? Am I out of my mind? Thanks for considering this and have a great day. So, Steve, I think this guy is spot on. What do you think?
I think that is a very interesting analogy. I was visualizing it when I was reading it. I think that, Josh, I'd say thank you for writing in. I think that's a very interesting take.
I think he nails it. I think he sums it up and just absolutely nails it. So I appreciate you writing in. The music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. The show is live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. You can find the notes, podcast.AskNoahShow.com. To get the latest, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Colonel Linux. He's at Linux7s. The show at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.